The photographer hadn't even lowered his camera when she hissed it through her teeth, like venom on a silver spoon. Couldn't afford something better? Her tone had that sugary burn she reserved for when there were witnesses nearby, smiles on the outside, rot behind the gums. She didn't wait for my answer. She never really cared for them anyway. Her fingers adjusted the diamond necklace that wasn't hers, just borrowed from a friend of a friend for the photos. That's all she cared about. Impressions, not people. It was her sister's wedding, and everything screamed curated perfection. The imported orchids flown in from Amsterdam. The champagne that cost more per bottle than my suit had 15 years ago, and that miserable string quartet plucking away at yet another sterile Vivaldi piece, as if it meant something to anyone. Everyone dressed like they were auditioning for a royal documentary, and there I was, in a simple, navy blue suit I'd had tailored back when newspapers still mattered. You'd think I'd be embarrassed. That was the point of her comment, after all, to slice me down to the right size in front of her high-end family. But I didn't flinch. I didn't smirk. I didn't even look at her. That was part of the game. Don't give her the satisfaction. And if you're still listening right now, take 2 seconds and subscribe. 90% of you never do, and it keeps the team going behind the scenes. All right, back to the wedding. I wasn't standing there for her. I wasn't standing there for her family, either. I was there because she'd insisted, said it would look weird if I skipped another one of her family's events. Her words, not mine. Weird. As if she was ever worried about appearances until it meant she might be embarrassed by association. I kept my hands in my pockets, drifting toward the back corner of the ballroom, content to become wallpaper. That's when the groom's father saw it. Not my face, not my tie, my cuff. More specifically, the cufflinks. His eyes narrowed. His jaw stopped chewing. He squinted and stepped forward like he was looking at a museum artifact he hadn't expected to find in a back alley pawn shop. He leaned in slightly, confirming something. And then, like someone had thrown cold water down the back of his neck, he went pale. He grabbed his son by the elbow mid-conversation, dragging him away from a chat with the officiant. My wife didn't notice. She was busy air-kissing some cousin in a rented Dior. I didn't need to hear the whole conversation. Just the first line, muttered in a harsh whisper that still cut through the background music. Those are custom Rothschild cufflinks. Do you know who he is? That's when the murmurs started. See, here's the thing about symbols. Most people treat them like decoration. But in certain circles, very, very specific ones, they're signals. Those cufflinks? Not for sale. Not online. Not even cataloged. They were a bespoke set gifted once, under very discreet conditions, at a private negotiation table in Zurich. And only a few people on earth knew what they meant. One of them, apparently, was the groom's father. I didn't react. Just stood still with a glass of sparkling water in hand, nodding politely to no one. Let the storm begin. The irony was delicious. My wife thought I wore that old suit because I had nothing better. Thought it made her look better by comparison. She never noticed the cufflinks. Never cared to. Thought they were something I picked up on clearance at Nordstrom Rack. She was wrong. And not just about the cufflinks. About everything. Because in her mind, she'd married a dull man. A harmless man. A man who would always be quietly, unremarkably beneath her. A man in the background. But now, one whisper, one twitch in the old man's face. And suddenly, I wasn't in the background anymore. And she hadn't even noticed. Not yet. Weddings are noisy things. Clinking glasses, forced laughter, over-rehearsed speeches, and a whole lot of smiling through gritted teeth. But beneath that, there's a different kind of sound. The rustle of whispered names. The tilt of heads. The shifting of power without a single word spoken aloud. I caught the first tremor during the vows. 2 bridesmaids, side by side, their matching updos rigid enough to survive a hurricane, leaned toward each other. One whispered something behind a manicured hand. The other's eyes widened, and she turned, subtly, toward me. Then a groomsman, halfway through an expensive joke, paused mid-punchline. His gaze landed on me for a second too long. He quickly looked away, the punchline evaporating in his throat. He pulled out his phone under the table, thumb moving fast. I didn't shift, didn't adjust my tie or check my sleeves. I just let them watch. Let them guess. Let them wonder. My wife, meanwhile, stood in the center of the reception like a chandelier, bright, decorative, and just unstable enough to make people cautious. She glided from guest to guest, compliments trailing behind her like perfume. You look stunning tonight. That gown is to die for. Your sister's lucky to have you. She was glowing, but she hadn't noticed the dimming around her, because the glow wasn't hers anymore. I watched from the terrace, an outsider with a view. The night breeze tugged gently at the linen tablecloths. I sipped sparkling water, ignoring the flutes of champagne being passed around. Never touch the distractions when something important is unfolding. Across the room, the groom's father was no longer working the crowd. His wine sat untouched on a tray. He stood near a marble pillar, head bent, phone pressed to his ear. Not a social call. Not from that posture. His eyes flicked to me again, and he turned his back to the room. That's when I caught another one. Her uncle. The bride's side. Top floor of a private equity firm whose name you'd only know if you had 7 digits in your monthly expense account. He was halfway through slicing his filet mignon when he spotted me. His fork stopped midair. His brow furrowed. You could practically see the filing cabinet in his head spinning. Trying to place me. That's what they were all doing now. Trying to remember where they'd seen me. What article? What room? What deal? My wife used to joke that I was forgettable. You just blend in, she'd say, like it was charming. She had no idea how much effort it takes to disappear. Until you don't. And here's the part she never understood. There are men in this world who dress like shadows on purpose. Who keep their heads down not because they have nothing to say, but because they've already said the things that matter, in meetings you'll never be invited to. I caught the eye of a man in a dark gray tuxedo who looked like he was born with a trust fund. He nodded slightly, barely, and I returned it with the same nothing expression. We'd never spoken. Probably never would. But that nod said more than any toast. It said, I see you. And it said, I remember. Because some men forget names. But no one forgets a pair of Rothschild cufflinks. Not if you've ever been in a room where real decisions are made. Not if you know the price, not the cost, but the price of silence. I turned back to look at my wife, still chatting near the cake display, basking in attention that was no longer hers. The photographer shifted his lens. Not to her. To me. The flash popped. She didn't even notice. But the temperature in the room had dropped 5 degrees. And the spotlight had moved. The lounge had low lighting, deep leather chairs, and the smell of cigars no one had the courage to light inside yet. It was a room built for power, not comfort. The kind of place men slipped into when the real deal started, away from the garter toss and champagne fountains. I stood near the far window, looking out over the garden lights and trying not to laugh. Because by now, I'd seen the glances, felt the shift. My cufflinks had done their job, silent, subtle, and far more disruptive than any outburst could have been. And then came the voice. Low, controlled, just behind my right shoulder. Is it really you? I turned. The man in front of me was older now, hair grayer, but the posture hadn't changed. Michael Haynes, former senior partner at Arcturus Capital. Back in 2009, we shared an elevator in Zurich for all of 40 seconds, and 4 months later, his firm reversed its position on Argentine bonds after a certain anonymous report surfaced. I never signed it. Never needed to. Next to him was Jasper Monroe, London School of Economics, reputation for sniping distressed assets like a hawk with insider instincts. He once bet $200 million on a single man's prediction. That man was me. Not that he ever admitted it. They both looked like they'd seen a ghost. I gave them a nod and sipped my drink, something they both took as confirmation. You've been off the radar since Geneva, Michael said. We thought you vanished. I did, I replied simply. A beat passed. Jasper glanced toward the main hall, where the string quartet was now sawing their way through some desperate rendition of Coldplay. He raised an eyebrow. You're here, with the bridal party? My wife's sister. That got them both blinking. Michael's eyes darted toward the open lounge doors, where my wife had just sauntered past without a glance in our direction, clutching a flute of champagne and laughing too loudly at something the DJ said. She doesn't know? Jasper asked. I shrugged. We all have our secrets. He chuckled under his breath. You once told the Brazilian delegation they had 5 days before the IMF pulled the cord. You did it with a chess metaphor and a smile. Now you're just... He gestured vaguely toward my suit. Simple, I said. No such thing with you. Another man entered the room. I didn't recognize him, but he recognized me. He stopped walking, paused, then turned back and exited without a word. Jasper leaned closer, his voice low. Does she even know who she married? I looked out the window again, letting the silence do the talking. Because the truth is, she never asked. Not once. She never cared about what I used to do. Never wondered about the occasional foreign phone call. Never questioned why I kept a VPN hardwired into the wall, or why I had 2 passports in the lockbox she never touched. To her, I was a quiet man with decent manners and a job she could never quite explain to her friends. That was fine. I preferred it that way. But now the name was back in the room. The one I used to hear behind boardroom doors, at summits, whispered by people who knew not to say it too loud. I never chased headlines. I drafted the ones that got signed in gold ink. Then I disappeared. I'd meant to stay gone. Geneva was supposed to be the last. One last council, one final crisis averted. After that, I walked away. And then I met her. She liked me because I was quiet, predictable, safe. But I wasn't any of those things. And tonight, the mask she loved was beginning to slip, one breath at a time. Behind me, Michael pulled out a card and offered it. If you ever resurface. I didn't take it. I didn't need to. He'd find me if he really wanted to. They all would. As the doors swung again, my wife walked past, her heels clicking on the polished floor. She didn't even glance our way. Didn't notice that the men she spent her whole life wanting to impress were now standing around me. And I, quiet, forgotten, ordinary me, was the reason they were whispering again. She used to call me boring. She had no idea. The clinking of glass brought the room to a slow, expectant silence. The kind that stretches just long enough to command attention without begging for it. The groom stood, flushed and jittery, holding his champagne awkwardly. Before I say anything, he began, voice shaky but rehearsed. My father asked to say a few words. Apparently, something came up. He stepped aside, and the groom's father rose, smoothly, calmly, like this wasn't his first time at a mic. Because it wasn't. He was the kind of man who gave speeches that made headlines. He'd buried CEOs with a single pause. But this time, the intensity in his voice was different. This wasn't business. This was reverence. Today is about family, he said, voice echoing in the vaulted hall. And some family we're lucky to marry into. People chuckled politely, expecting a harmless anecdote about in-laws and new beginnings. Then he turned his body, slowly, deliberately, and looked directly at me. I was still at my table, hands folded, not moving, not blinking. I once had the honor, he continued, of watching this man. He raised his hand and pointed. Take a fund on the brink of collapse and turn it into a global benchmark. A process I thought impossible, until I saw it done. A chair scraped faintly across the floor somewhere. A fork clinked against a plate. But otherwise, silence. I didn't know he was here today, the old man said. But I'm grateful he is. He didn't mention my name. He didn't need to. I saw the ripple hit the head table first. My wife was mid-sip. Her hand froze. Her eyes narrowed. Not in confusion. No, not yet. It was more primal. A flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. The sense that maybe, just maybe, she didn't know everything after all. Her gaze turned. She looked at me, and I didn't flinch. For the first time that evening, her expression dropped its polish. She wasn't smiling now. She wasn't smug. She looked stiff, like a mannequin someone forgot to dust off. Her eyes darted back toward the groom's father, as if searching for some kind of clarification, some way to reinterpret what she'd just heard. But the room had already shifted. At other tables, people were glancing over. Women whispering behind clutched napkins. Men checking their watches not to leave, but to timestamp the moment. Even the photographer, who had spent the past hours circling the bride like a vulture over a glittering carcass, was now moving toward me. I didn't rise, didn't wave, didn't do a damn thing. I just sat there. Let it sink in. Let her feel it. You have to understand something about my wife. She worshipped optics. Status. Her entire personality was built on being adjacent to importance. Not important herself. She was never wired for that. But near it. Close enough to feel the warmth without ever starting the fire. That's why she married me. Because I didn't glow too brightly. Because I didn't compete. And tonight, her little illusion cracked wide open in front of 300 people, a quarter of whom were high enough up the ladder to matter. I saw her glance at her sister, pure confusion. Then at her mother, whose mouth was tight. And finally back to me. I raised my glass. Not high. Just enough for her to see. No smile. No nod. Just acknowledgement. The groom's father finished his toast, thanked the room, and sat down like nothing earth-shattering had occurred. But it had. And she knew it. Because the man she mocked for wearing a suit from a decade ago was now the center of gravity. Not her. Not the bride. Not even the money propping up this over-decorated circus. The room didn't applaud loudly. They didn't need to. The silence was the applause. She looked at me again, eyes pleading for something. An explanation, maybe. A denial. A crack in the story she could slip through and control the narrative. But I gave her nothing. Because that's the thing about ghosts. We don't make noise. We make impact. Her fingers locked around my arm the second I set my glass down. Hard. Not affectionate. Possessive. What is going on? She hissed through her teeth. Her smile frozen for the sake of the guests still watching from across the room. I turned toward her slowly. Met her eyes with the same calm I'd carried all night. You never asked, I said. She blinked. What? You never asked? I repeated, quieter this time, just for her. She stared at me like I was speaking a different language. And maybe I was. Because in her world, things only mattered if they were said loudly, announced at parties, posted on social media. But I lived in a quieter place. One where words cost something. One where silence had more weight than her entire wardrobe. Behind her, I saw the bride's father glance in our direction, then give me a curt, respectful nod. Not the forced kind reserved for groomsmen or family members. The real kind. The one you give to someone who could make your financial future evaporate with a single sentence and choose not to. The photographers were shifting, too. Just slightly. Their lenses no longer following the bride's train or the curated floral arch. They were pointing, subtly, professionally, toward the table where I sat. The man in the modest suit. The one no one saw coming. And my wife? She was finally feeling what it meant to lose a room. She looked around again, her eyes scanning faces like a social stock ticker. And what she saw must have terrified her. The smiles were thinner now. The conversations quieter. A few guests she'd spent the last year desperately trying to impress were whispering, not to her, but about her. And all of it traced back to me. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, voice trembling, mascara fighting gravity. I was never hiding, I said, stepping out of her grip. That part was true. I never lied to her. I told her I worked in consulting. I told her I used to travel. I told her I left that life behind years ago. She just didn't care to ask what kind of consulting, or who I traveled for, because she assumed, in her dismissive little hierarchy, that if I didn't flaunt it, it wasn't real. She preferred surface shine, status that could be photographed, name dropped, turned into a story for her little garden brunches with women who married real estate agents and told themselves they'd made it. She wanted to be the center of every room. And now she was something else. A side note, an afterthought, an accessory to the man she spent years subtly minimizing. I stepped away from the table. She didn't follow. I made my way to the bar, nodding politely at a couple of men I recognized, power brokers who hadn't spoken my name in public for a decade. One of them raised his glass. I raised mine back. My wife was still standing there, alone, unsure of whether to sit back down or pretend she had somewhere important to be. That's the moment the mask slipped. Not in a dramatic way. No screaming. No slaps. No scene. Just stillness. She stood frozen in her designer heels, wrapped in her own illusion, realizing the scaffolding she'd built, carefully, ruthlessly, over years, was made of matchsticks. And the flame had already started. The cigar lounge was tucked behind a velvet curtain, barely lit, with a bar cart that looked older than the country. It smelled of oak, leather, and wealth that didn't need to prove itself. I wasn't smoking, just breathing, watching, letting the weight of the evening settle where it belonged. He found me there, the groom's father, still in his tailored tuxedo, but his demeanor had shifted. Less host, more envoy. Forgive the reaction earlier, he said, sliding into the chair across from mine like we were old acquaintances. We didn't know it was you. That phrase, it was you, as if I were some myth. A warning label, a code name that got passed around at closed-door summits. He said it with the cautious reverence of someone who once saw a building collapse and later met the engineer who warned them it would. I shrugged. You weren't supposed to. He nodded, lips tightening, then relaxed. What brings you here anyway? My wife insisted. That word, wife, hung in the air like smoke. He tilted his head, understanding too much. Oh, and that's all it took. One syllable, and the whole chessboard flipped. Because now he knew. Knew that the woman who spent the reception showcasing her curated life was married to someone she didn't even understand. A man who hadn't needed to make a scene because the room had already reoriented itself around him. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a card. Thick. Minimalist. The kind of paper that made pens nervous. We're restructuring next quarter, he said, almost like a confession. Could use a neutral lens. Someone who doesn't flinch at sovereign instability. He offered it without a pitch. Just placed it on the table between us like an offering. I picked it up, pocketed it, didn't say a word. No promises, no agreement, just acknowledgement. And that was enough. Because in his world, that silence was a handshake. Meanwhile, out in the main hall, I could hear the shift, the ripple of recalibration, the questions spreading like wildfire wrapped in velvet. Why didn't she tell us? You said he was retired? Does he always dress like that? My wife was still out there, and the spotlight she had once basked in had turned cruel. It wasn't admiration anymore. It was scrutiny. And she wasn't built for that. Not without a script. Someone had cornered her near the dessert table. I could see it from where I sat, through the glass partition. Her smile was wide, too wide. The kind she used when she was lying and knew it. Her voice cracked as she tried to explain. He just doesn't talk about work. He's private. You know how men are. But they didn't. Because these weren't suburban gossip types. These were insiders. People who knew the language of power, who read balance sheets like novels and spotted weakness like blood and water. They weren't buying what she was selling. One woman tilted her head. You told me he used to do logistics. Something about warehouse operations. Another man added, didn't you say he's been out of the game for years? She nodded too quickly. Right. Yes, I meant consulting on logistics. Years ago. He likes being low-key. Low-key. She used that word often. It used to make her feel superior, as if she were the star and I the unassuming sidekick. Now, it sounded hollow, like a cover story that never expected to be audited. Back in the lounge, the groom's father rose from his seat. I won't keep you. Just, thank you for being here. It elevated everything. I nodded. You handled it well. He chuckled, then leaned closer. Does she know? She knows now. He didn't press, just gave a final nod and disappeared through the curtain. I lingered, because while she flailed in the ballroom, trying to tape her image back together, I didn't need to lift a finger. The room was correcting itself. Influence was shifting, and it was doing so without her. She had spent years pretending I was someone safe, someone small, someone she could sculpt into a prop. And now? Now she couldn't even finish a sentence without her voice betraying her. She wasn't losing the spotlight. It had simply found its rightful place. By the time dinner was served, the room felt like it had developed its own gravitational pull, and it wasn't centered on the bride anymore. Or the cake. Or the couple. It wasn't even centered on my wife, who had spent most of her adult life perfecting the art of being the loudest quiet person in any room. The kind of woman who pretended to hate attention while dying if a camera didn't find her at least once every 20 minutes. But tonight, the lens had drifted, and the temperature at the family table had dropped noticeably. Her sister, still glowing from the ceremony, now glanced down at her plate more than up at the conversation. The effortless affection they usually passed back and forth with subtle digs and polished smirks had evaporated. The air between them wasn't hostile. It was worse. It was uncomfortable. The groom, charming, affable, eager to please, kept stealing nervous glances my way. Not with suspicion, with caution, like he wasn't sure what I'd do next, but whatever it was, he knew it wouldn't be loud, which somehow made it worse. And the bride's mother, who normally prided herself on being just enough removed from the drama to feel superior to it, lowered her voice when speaking to my wife now. Not out of respect, out of containment, like my wife might break if the wind shifted wrong. She always liked simple things, my wife said suddenly, laughing a little too hard as she gestured vaguely toward me. He just dresses that way. It's his thing. Keeps people guessing, right? She elbowed the bride playfully. No one responded, not even the staff. I didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't even turn my head. I didn't need to, because my silence was the most expensive thing in that room. It always had been. She tried again. He's always been a little mysterious, you know. Quiet. That's just who he is. Kind of a, she searched for the word, as if reaching for a safety rope. Minimalist, her sister offered dryly. Not unkind. Not warm either. Her tone made my wife flinch. Just slightly. That's when I saw it. Her looking around the table, trying to recalculate her position in real time. Because before tonight, she always knew where she stood. She was the glamorous one, the smart one, the one who married for peace after a wild youth. That was her narrative. She curated it with the precision of a brand strategist. Her friends were her audience. Her family were her props. And I was the placeholder husband, reliable, unthreatening, never messy, never center stage. But now, each person at the table was seeing something she hadn't prepared them for. A contradiction, a crack, a man she never described because she didn't know how to describe him. And in that vacuum, the room started rewriting the story for her. It wasn't vicious. It was quiet, but it was total. One cousin across the table asked what I did. My wife opened her mouth to answer, but I beat her to it. Consulting, I said softly. The cousin nodded slowly. I think I've heard of you before. Something about he paused, cautious. No, never mind. My wife shot him a look. He's very private, she said. But the statement landed flat, like a dropped fork. Nobody cared anymore about her spin. They were watching me now. And worse, watching her try to keep up. She looked over, eyes tight with desperation disguised as amusement. but I just sipped my water and returned to my plate. No acknowledgement. No signal of rescue. She was used to my silence meaning detachment. Now, it meant dominance. She tried to pivot to small talk with her mother. A story about the florist messing up the boutonnieres. Her voice was high and strained, like she was performing joy at gunpoint. But her mother just nodded politely and turned her attention to someone else mid-sentence. It was brutal. Not dramatic. Not public. Just subtle. One by one, her audience left the stage. And all she could do was sit there, still wearing the mask of someone who thought she was the star of the show. She wasn't. Not anymore. Now, she was just his wife. And the room was adjusting accordingly. It started with a single post. A grainy shot, taken from an odd angle near the cigar lounge. Someone's iPhone tilted just enough to catch the side of my face and the flash of the cufflink beneath my sleeve. Caption: Who's the guy in the blue suit at the Grant Richter wedding? Not on the guest list, but sitting at the family table. Anyone? For most people, it would have died there. Just digital dust in the constant churn of status updates and wedding hashtags. But not this time. Someone recognized me. Not by name, by pattern. A journalist I hadn't seen in 15 years. The kind who never needed confirmation to publish because their guesses were usually terrifyingly close. They posted the photo in a private forum first. Then a whisper chain of finance bloggers grabbed it. Then one of them connected it with an old archive photo from a Luxembourg trade panel. My face was blurrier back then, my hair darker, but the cufflinks? They were unmistakable. Unconfirmed. Is this the reclusive consultant behind the Vortic merger? It was posted to a mid-level finance blog first, then syndicated by a bigger one. Screenshots started flying. Someone on Twitter did a side-by-side. Someone else found a speech transcript I once ghost wrote, but was foolish enough to deliver in person. Then it snowballed. Blue Suit Mystery Man might be the architect of sovereign debt collapse response plan in 2014. Anonymous strategist at Grant Richter wedding? Industry buzzes over possible resurfacing. And then came the tags. In comments. In DMs. In forwarded links with subject lines like, "Dude, is this you?" and "Holy hell." From across the reception hall, I felt it happen in real time. My phone buzzed once. Then again, harder, longer. A vibration that didn't stop for a full 30 seconds. I glanced down. A message from her. Just 4 words. "Make it stop. Please." I looked up. She was still at the family table, gripping her phone like it might dissolve. Her mouth was tight, jaw clenched, knuckles white. She didn't look over at me. Couldn't. She was living the nightmare she never planned for, the kind of attention she didn't control. And she was unraveling. The cameras were catching her now, too. But not because of her dress. Because of the question, the one none of her curated posts or filtered stories could answer. Why didn't she ever mention him? Why did the woman who made a spectacle of every haircut, every new purse, every overpriced glass of wine with her CEO besties, never talk about the man whose name was now being passed around in backroom meetings? The silence didn't make me look secretive. It made her look ignorant. It made her look like she'd either been lied to, or worse, ignored something she didn't think was worth asking. And that's when the tone shifted again. Because when a woman builds her entire identity on knowing everything about everyone, on being the informed one, the sharp one, the one with access, being exposed as clueless is a form of social death. She texted again. "Please, say something. They're asking me questions." I didn't reply. Because here's the part she never understood. I never chased visibility. She did. She wanted it. Craved it. She wrapped herself in attention like it was cashmere and wore it to breakfast. She built a life around being seen. But now the spotlight had turned, and it wasn't flattering. It was cold, harsh, unforgiving. And for the first time, it wasn't aimed at her on purpose. It was aimed at me. And she was caught in the edge of it, exposed. Not by scandal, not by secrets, but by omission. By the fact that she never thought to ask. And now? Now she couldn't unsee what the world was starting to realize. She wasn't married to a placeholder. She was married to the man behind the curtain. And the curtain was gone. They caught me by the terrace, away from the noise, where the air was cooler and the music couldn't reach. 2 of her relatives, cousins or nephews, or some other distant title she used like furniture, useful only when it matched the room. Both men in their early 30s, awkward in their expensive suits, the kind who wore cologne like confidence and spoke too fast when nervous. "Hey," one said, eyes shifting to make sure we were alone. "We just wanted to say no offense, but we didn't know." I tilted my head slightly. "Didn't know what?" The other cleared his throat. "What you really do? Who you are?" "Oh, that." I said nothing. Let them twist in it a bit. People always rush to fill silence with their own guilt. The first one stepped in closer. Just so you know, she's been telling people you were on disability, that you couldn't work anymore. My brow raised slightly. Really? He nodded, apologetic. Yeah, like you were. You know, early retirement for health reasons. She made it sound like you were kind of done. The second one added. She even joked once, said she was the breadwinner, that she let you feel useful by doing yard work. I looked past them, over the garden lights, where my wife now sat alone at a table, scrolling through her phone like it owed her an explanation. I smiled. Small. Tight. Thank you. They shifted uncomfortably. We just thought, you should know. But I did know. I'd always known. It wasn't just the comments. It was how she introduced me. If she introduced me at all. Oh, this is my husband. He's retired. She always dropped the word like a glass on tile. Final. Fragile. She'd crafted that story over time. A man who had once worked, now content to fade into the background while she hosted galas and signed checks and collected praise from rooms full of people who didn't know any better. But now they were asking questions. And she was scrambling for answers she didn't have. I looked down at my phone, thought for a moment, then dialed. The man who answered didn't need pleasantries. Still owe me for Madrid, I said. There was a pause. Name it. I gave him the name of the nonprofit board my wife had clawed her way onto. The one she flaunted like it made her a philanthropist. The same board whose members were now quietly watching a PR crisis unfold. Not about me, but about her. I want her removed, I said. Not publicly, not dramatically, just removed. He understood. Replaced or vacant. Vacant. He didn't ask why. Didn't need to. I'll draft the recommendation tonight. Board meets tomorrow. I hung up. That was it. No rage. No screaming. No revenge fantasy. Just precision. Because people like her didn't fall from one blow. They dimmed. Faded. Lost wattage until even their own reflections stopped recognizing them. I returned to the reception. The music had picked up again, but the dancing was slower now, more cautious. My wife sat with her shoulders pulled in, posture crumbling inward like a collapsed tent. A woman approached her, one of the older board donors she used to parade around like a personal endorsement. They spoke briefly, and then the woman walked away. Didn't hug her, didn't smile, just left. My wife looked down at her lap, unmoving. The first crack in her face wasn't from emotion. It was from realization, the kind that comes too late. Because she had spent years pruning her image, trimming her life down to something polished and enviable. But in doing so, she had clipped the only roots that mattered. Trust. And once that's gone, you don't burn. You just fade. The dinner was small by most standards, 24 people, maybe less. No press. No speeches listed on the program. Just an off-the-record evening at a private club in a building with no sign out front. The kind of event where suits had no logos, watches had no diamonds, and conversations didn't begin with "what do you do?" because everyone already knew. I didn't intend to speak. They'd invited me out of courtesy, as they often did, hoping I might contribute an opinion, a correction, maybe a well-placed silence that said more than any data model could. But halfway through the second course, one of the hosts, a man who once swore he'd never take external advice again after a billion-dollar mistake, raised his glass. To the man behind the curtain, he said, grinning, "You made us all look smarter than we are." Laughter rippled through the room. A few glances turned my way, not in disbelief, in gratitude. I stood, briefly, gave a short nod, said nothing. That was enough. Somewhere between dessert and the discreet offering of Cuban cigars, I slipped out early. Not because I wasn't welcome, but because I'd said everything I needed without ever opening my mouth. Back at home, I loosened my tie, undid my cuff. Those cufflinks. Still there. Still sharp. Still mine. I took a photo. Just the cuff, the fabric, the steel glint of old power. No face. No background. Just the detail that started everything. Caption, still fits. I posted it to an account she didn't even know I had. But someone tagged her. Someone always did. It wasn't long before the message came through. No grand apology. No defense. Just, "I didn't mean to belittle you." I stared at the screen for a moment. Then typed, "You didn't. You revealed yourself." I didn't send anything else. Didn't block her. Didn't answer the 3 dots that pulsed and disappeared 3 times. She had built a life around being seen. But it wasn't seeing that had destroyed her. It was what she chose not to see. She thought power looked like marble floors, reserved seating, and 3-name law firm invites. She never realized real power walks through the side door, speaks only when necessary, and never needs to ask twice. She tried to make me small to feel big. Tried to turn me into a decorative husband. Harmless. Background noise. She used the wrong lens. Because I never had to shout. Never had to slam a door, or make a scene, or win an argument. All I had to do was show up. And let her implode on the silence she left herself in. The room at the wedding shifted. The people adjusted. The stories rewrote themselves in real time. And I just stood there. Because when you really understand how the world works, when you've shaped markets and silenced ministers and made billionaires sweat bullets across a mahogany table, someone mocking your suit feels like watching a dog bark at a mirror. And the best part? She'll never get it. Because the thing she mocked, the quiet, the simplicity, the restraint, that's what made me untouchable. She wanted to shine. I built the damn sun.